In the vibrant heart of the city, a black CEO, Elijah Roberts, owned one of the most successful and well-known clothing brands in the area. The store, which was a blend of high-end fashion and streetwear, had grown from a small boutique into a bustling empire over the last decade. Elijah, a self-made entrepreneur, had always prided himself on the inclusivity and diversity of his brand. His company had been a symbol of empowerment for the marginalized and underrepresented groups, and Elijah had worked tirelessly to create a space where everyone felt welcome, valued, and celebrated. His leadership was marked by compassion, fairness, and a deep commitment to justice. Elijah had not only built a successful business, but he had also become a respected figure in the community. People admired him for his perseverance, his focus on providing opportunities for others, and his dedication to promoting diversity both in his store and in his corporate structure. However, as often happens with success, the challenges began to multiply. The controversy that would soon change the trajectory of his life, and his company began on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Elijah decided to visit his flagship store, something he rarely had time to do due to his busy schedule. He walked into the store with a quiet confidence, expecting to blend in with the customers. However, what happened next would shake him to his core. As Elijah walked through the door, he was immediately stopped by the store's manager, a woman named Claire Thompson. She looked at him for a moment, her face expressionless, before crossing her arms and saying in a firm tone, "Sir, you need to leave." Elijah paused, momentarily confused. He had heard her clearly, but his mind was slow to process what she had said. "Excuse me?" he asked, his voice calm but tinged with disbelief. Claire repeated, this time with more force, "I said you need to leave. We're not serving you here." The word seemed surreal, and for a moment Elijah wondered if he had misheard. But there was no mistaking her cold demeanor and the unyielding authority in her voice. It became clear that she had no idea who he was. Elijah stood in stunned silence for a moment, trying to make sense of the situation. His store, was one of the most successful in the city, and yet here he was being turned away by one of his own employees. He had heard of such incident happening before, but he never imagined it would happen to him, and certainly not at the hands of someone who was meant to represent his values and vision. Without skipping a beat, Elijah took a step back and pulled out his phone. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a mistake," he said, his voice still calm. "I'm the CEO of this company." Claire's face twitched for a fraction of a second, but she quickly composed herself. "It doesn't matter who you are," she said, her voice growing colder. "You need to leave the premises immediately." A sense of unease began to settle in Elijah's chest. He had spent years cultivating an environment of respect and dignity, and here was someone in his own business acting as though he didn't belong. His mind raced, considering his options. He could feel his blood begin to boil, not just from the insult, but from the deeper, more painful realization that this was more than a simple misunderstanding. It was a reflection of the biases that, despite all his success and efforts, still lingered in the world. At that moment, a few other employees in the store began to notice the tension. Some whispered amongst themselves, while others simply stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Elijah, still reeling from the shock, knew he had to take action not just for himself, but for the sake of the values that had always driven his company. He calmly turned to one of the employees standing nearby, a young woman named Sarah. "Can you please get me the number for HR?" he asked, his voice steady. She hesitated for a moment, but quickly nodded, grabbing her phone. Meanwhile, Claire remained unmoved, standing at the entrance with her arms crossed, watching Elijah with a look of quiet disdain. Elijah dialed the number for HR, his mind racing with what had just transpired. It felt surreal, like an absurd dream. His breath quickened as he contemplated the gravity of the situation. A moment later, Elijah's phone rang, and he was connected to Brenda, the head of human resources. "Brenda," Elijah said, his voice a little strained, "I'm at the store right now, and I need you to come over immediately. There's a serious issue." Brenda, sensing the urgency in his voice, agreed to come over right away. Elijah hung up and turned his attention back to Claire. He had no intention of letting this go. Not now. Not ever. Within the next half hour, Brenda arrived at the store, her expression one of disbelief as she took in the scene. She quickly walked over to Elijah, who explained the situation. Brenda, a seasoned professional who had worked with Elijah for years, was shocked. She knew Claire well enough to understand that this was out of character for her. "Claire, what happened here?" Brenda asked, her voice calm but firm. "I told him to leave." Claire responded, still not offering any explanation as to why she had treated Elijah in such a way. "I don't care who he is. He needs to leave." Brenda glanced at Elijah, who was standing silently, clearly still processing the encounter. "Elijah, why don't you head to the office?" "I'll handle this," Brenda said, her tone diplomatic but assertive. Elijah nodded, grateful for her calm presence in the midst of the storm. As he walked toward the office, he could feel the eyes of the employees on him. This wasn't just about him, it was about everyone who worked there, everyone who had ever believed in the company and its mission. This was about standing up against prejudice and making sure that the values that had built the company remained intact. Meanwhile, Brenda spoke to Claire privately, asking her to explain her actions. It quickly became clear that Claire's decision was based on something much deeper than a misunderstanding or personal issues. She had harbored prejudices that were incompatible with the inclusive and diverse culture Elijah had worked so hard to cultivate. Brenda, appalled, made a swift decision. Claire's behavior was unacceptable, and the manager was immediately terminated. Elijah, sitting in the office, was informed of the decision moments later. He was disappointed, but not surprised. He had been through many challenges in his career, but this one cut deep. It was not just an isolated incident, it was a symptom of a larger, systemic problem in society. The news of Claire's firing spread quickly throughout the store, and many of the employees were both shocked and relieved. Elijah knew he had made the right decision, but it didn't make the sting of the experience any less painful. He was determined to ensure that his company remained a place where everyone was treated with the respect and dignity they deserved, regardless of race, background, or position. In the days that followed, Elijah made it clear that he was taking immediate steps to address the issue. He called a meeting with all the staff to discuss the importance of diversity, inclusivity, and respect in the workplace. He reiterated that anyone who did not share these values would not have a place in the company. Though the incident had shaken him, it had also reinforced his commitment to creating a more just and equal workplace. He would not let one individual's actions define the values of his company. He was determined to continue building a brand that celebrated diversity, equality, and acceptance, values that would never be compromised. As the weeks went by, Elijah continued to lead with the same determination that had brought him to this point. He implemented diversity and sensitivity training for all employees and worked to foster an even more inclusive environment. The company flourished as a result, and Elijah found himself more dedicated than ever to the mission that had inspired him from the very beginning. Stay tuned for more impactful stories and join the conversation. Subscribe to expect stories for your dose of thought-provoking narratives.